In this AQA micro video, let's spend a few minutes thinking about imperfect information. Now, why is information significant? Why it's important for consumers in a market? Well, critically, we assume when we think about rational choice theory that people use all the information available to make a fully informed, rational choice to help them maximize satisfaction. So when information is missing, when there are information gaps, that can lead to market failure. So information is essential for making sound economic decisions. You see, you need information about products, often they're quite complex goods and services, to properly evaluate the costs and the benefits or make informed choices. If you're thinking about buying an electric car, for example, what's the price? Fine, but what does it cost to maintain it? It's critical for making a choice about the long-term costs and benefits of making a major purchase. So when there's imperfect information, market failure can occur. We talk about information gaps. Now, those gaps happen when people have inaccurate, incomplete, uncertain or misunderstood data and therefore potentially can make wrong choices in markets. And there are loads of examples of information gaps. People not necessarily understanding the consequences of using tanning salons, for example. People underestimating or overestimating the consequences of painkillers or addictions to other drugs. Lots of information failures in terms of the information, the nous you need to get into the top degree courses. People often reluctant to save for retirement because they don't fully understand the complex world of pensions. We'll talk about the used car market in a few minutes, but clearly the uncertain quality of anything you buy second hand is something to take into account. Again, addiction to computer gaming and energy drinks. Can you find a reliable builder, or are you at risk of a rip-off merchant doing some plumbing, some plastering, some building? And of course, more recently, there's been a whole raft of issues to do with the anti-vax movement and the information failures contained within vaccinations and medicine more generally. A related concept is asymmetric information, and that happens when somebody knows more than somebody else in the market. So there's an imbalance of information. One party in a transaction has more or better information than another. For example, imagine a used car salesman who knows that a car has a defect, potentially a major defect, but the buyer is unaware of this. So the buyer in the situation is at a disadvantage because they don't have all the information they need to make a fully informed decision, and clearly that can lead to problems which we'll come to in a second. Some situations when it comes to asymmetric information, the seller knows perhaps quite a bit more than the buyer. Can you think of any examples? Maybe press the pause button here and try and think of an example where the seller knows more than the buyer. So one thinks about used vehicles. If I'm selling my second-hand car, I know more about its history than the buyer. Pharmacy prescription advice from your local pharmacist. Private tutoring and universities. The housing market, for example. Somebody selling a house might know more about the history of the building and potential structural faults than the buyer. Buyer beware. In other situations, the buyer might know more than the seller. The market for health insurance, for example. If I'm taking out health insurance, I know more about my health and my health history than the provider of insurance. The market for secured and unsecured credit. So if I'm taking out a loan, I probably know more about my ability to pay back a loan than the seller of the credit does. And oftentimes in markets such as antiques, insiders have more knowledge about something than a wary seller. So asymmetric information is palpable. It's very common in different markets. Landlords who know more about the properties than a student tenant. A borrower knows more about their ability to repay a loan than the lender. Car insurance companies can't tell the risks associated with selling premiums to each individual driver. Doctors have better knowledge about drugs and treatment than their patients, and information advantages for high-frequency stock traders. There are lots of examples, aren't there, of markets where there's asymmetric information. So from used vehicles to insider dealing to product warranties to health insurance, this is a really key area. How does imperfect information lead to problems? Well, people may have a lack of information, a gap about their own private benefits. If they had better information or fuller information, they might that might change their marginal private benefit curve, otherwise known as the demand curve. So, for example, in this situation, the consumer might be overestimating the benefit of something for them. And if they had better information or fuller information, that might cause a fall in their demand because they are more aware of the benefits of what they're consuming. It might be the case that, and as a result, price and quantity would fall. And it might be the case that they're underestimating the cost. So, for example, people may underestimate the cost of vaping or underestimate the cost of an unhealthy diet, for example, to them. And if they had better information about the consequences to their own costs, their own well-being and health in the long run, the market demand would be lower because the marginal private cost is higher. You see here that if the marginal private cost is higher, people aren't willing to buy as much of that product. Now, the market for lemons is a classic market. It's a market for used cars. A lemon is a dud product. You're buying something second-hand, already used, and you find out that far from being a peach, it's a lemon. And the most famous paper, probably in the whole of economics, information economics, was this paper written by George Akerlof, The Market for Lemons, Quality Uncertainty in the Market Mechanism, which I think was 1970s paper. Akerlof is a renowned economist who's made big contributions to information economics. He's won a Nobel Prize for his economics. In particular, his theory about markets under asymmetric information. Now, the market for lemons is basically where buyers and sellers have different levels of information about the quality of the product being sold. And in this market, buyers are wary. That means they're reluctant of being taken for a ride and end up paying less for the product than it's worth. So, George Akerlof, sellers know more about the quality of used vehicles than the buyer. I've got a 14-year-old Citroen, a teenager now. I'm thinking of selling it. If I sell, I know more about the car than the buyer, potential buyer. So the buyer cannot accurately tell the quality of the car necessarily. And therefore, if they can't tell that, typically when they're negotiating, they'll offer an average price for all cars. But that's typically lower than the seller's perceived value for good cars. So sellers of good cars aren't going to get the price that they expect or want. And therefore, some sellers who have good cars for sale will remove their good vehicles from open sale. Therefore, the average quality of cars goes down. And as the average quality of cars goes down, buyers are no longer willing to buy at average prices. They'll offer even lower prices. Bad will drive out good, if you pardon the pun, and this increases the risk of the market disappearing. This was Akerlof's famous market for lemons. Well, how can you overcome the information problem in second-hand markets? Often, for example, in used car markets, you can offer extended test drives for potential buyers. And of course, lots of car firms now do that for new as well as second-hand cars. Have a significant test drive. See what the car's like, see how it feels. You might be required as a seller to provide a full service history, including MOT test logs. The seller can provide an extended car warranty to lower the risk of purchase. There might be mandatory cooling off periods, so you might be able to get your money back for up to 2 weeks to avoid buyer remorse. A lot of used car companies now do extensive pre-purchase diagnostic testing using mechanics, so they can do a full test of the reliability of the vehicle. And often social media is a way of overcoming the lemons problem. Review platforms can help improve trust between buyers and sellers, although there are clearly risks when people are using review platforms, especially dodgy contributions. Governments often decide that they want to improve information to improve outcomes in markets by giving people better information to make a more informed choice. And the obvious examples, aren't they? The health warnings on cigarettes, which become increasingly extreme, if you like, blunt over time. Better, clearer, simpler nutritional labelling on food products. Gamble-aware information awareness programs, particularly in the online gambling sector. Introducing industry standards for car repairs, for builders, kite marks and things. If you have genuinely well-maintained industry standards, the buyer can have more confidence. Consumer protection laws, including those mandatory cooling off periods, And compulsion, sometimes changing the default option can help overcome information failure, particularly when it comes to things like vaccinations and pension enrolment. Information failure is inevitable in a world of product complexity. Of course, we now live in a world of highly complex products. People simply don't know the full information of the things they're buying. The paradox of choice can come in here. Oftentimes, there is so much choice in the market that people suffer from choice overload, and that can distort the decisions we make. And most people aren't fully rational. We'll talk about this in a second. They have bounded rationality and bounded self-control. Fake news, misleading advertising can damage consumer sovereignty and lead to a loss of efficiency. And information failure can also have equity issues, such as students from poor backgrounds finding it hard to access the best internships, the best apprenticeships, and the best universities. Now, behavioural interventions can make a difference. So we'll have a video on nudge theory, but hard nudges may be needed, such as compulsory vaccinations and enrolment into pension schemes. So there's a concept here called bounded rationality. So the existence of information gaps is directly related to the concept of bounded rationality, which was given to us by the Nobel laureate Herbert Simon. So bounded rationality is the idea that humans have limited cognitive or brain resources. They're not able to make completely rational decisions in all circumstances. And they must make decisions based on the information that they have available. And clearly, if there are information gaps and asymmetries, as we've discussed in this video, this can lead to suboptimal choices. Now, in a situation of bounded rationality, particularly when information is complex and costly to acquire and process, many people simply rely on heuristics, heuristic behaviour or rules of thumb to help simplify the decision-making process. So what is a heuristic? Lovely word, isn't it? Well, a heuristic is a mental shortcut that we use pretty much every day to make decisions quickly and efficiently. So they help us make decisions without having to consider all the information. So one is what's called the anchoring heuristic. So we rely heavily on the first piece of information we receive to decide. So we're shopping for a new TV, a new big screen TV. We're more likely to buy a TV that's on sale because it's cheaper than the anchor price that we saw first in a shop. Here's 4 examples of heuristics. These are heuristics that people tend to fall back on because of bounded rationality. Hope that makes sense. One is price quality. Many consumers assume that higher priced products are of better quality. They may not necessarily be the case, but expensive brands often give the illusion, perhaps, of superior performance and durability. And people may decide to go for the higher price for baked beans, for fresh pasta, what have you, because they assume it's better quality. The familiarity heuristic. So consumers often choose a brand or product that they are familiar with because that gives them a sense of comfort and trust. Little wonder, of course, that so many businesses are phenomenally focused on trying to develop this brand awareness and brand loyalty. Brand loyalty heuristic, many consumers stick with a brand for years. If you think about a brand like Premier Inn or McDonald's or Nando's, I use them the whole time because they consistently deliver the quality and satisfaction that I want. And actually the variance is low. You get a pretty low variance with McDonald's. The meal you get pretty much is the same time in and time out. And availability heuristic, where consumers recall instances of a product or brand readily, they're more likely to choose it. So if something comes to mind, they're more likely to choose it. So information economics, really important if you're understanding consumer behaviour at micro. And I hope you found this video useful. Take care and see you soon.